And if not, we all know UPS, there's been some shipping issues, but the new promotion from Sappi, it's called Reach Out and Touch. It's an amazing educational piece. I want to just keep feeling it, but I won't. So really, and it's great. So with that, I just want to introduce our speaker for today, which is Vicki Strull. Vicki hails from Atlanta. She is a design strategist who has worked with some of the biggest brands in marketing. Companies like HP, Bear, Pizza Hut, and if you happen to catch her keynote at D-Scoop, or you follow her on LinkedIn, you know we are in for a treat today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vicki.
Thank you, Jill. Really appreciate your having us today, and good to see everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can start this. Hold on, and then let me get into this. Oh wait, on the wrong page. Hold on. Let's go back here. Let's go back here. Hold on. Let's go back here. Hold on. Here we go. Okay, so I think you guys can see all of that. Okay, good. So first thing I just want to point out is the irony that we are talking about reaching out in touch, but we're in this period of COVID and social distancing. So what we're really talking about is the impact of touch as it impacts packaging. So the touch on packaging and what it does to influence what we buy, how we feel about the product that we buy, how we feel about the brand. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. And I'll show you some real world examples. Certainly in packaging, we'll go deep into that. But then also there's some direct mail and some other marketing and communications things and a couple of surprises that you'll be able to see as well. Let's begin at the end. What I mean by that when I say we begin at the end, you've already purchased the product. So you already have the product in hand. You've done all of the research. You've Googled it. You've looked at reviews and everything like that. And you have gotten the product and you're really excited about this thing and you're ready to open it up.
Hey, what's up guys? I'm KBHD here, and this is the one we've been waiting for. This is the one I told you to skip iPhone 8 for. This is the one that represents the future of Apple smartphones. This is iPhone 10. And while it doesn't say X anywhere on the front of the box, people are pretty much always going to call this one the X. I've just accepted that. So this is your first look at the unboxing experience.
Here's what I love about that. First of all, it's an unboxing video, so just packaging is in just the name of the genre of video that we're watching, right? Because it's unboxing. Here's what's also happening. That video is roughly about 9 minutes long, and I've trimmed it to the first 30 seconds. And those first 30 seconds are devoted to packaging. So packaging sets the entire tone for the rest of the video. And it's not just for the rest of the video, but it really sets the tone for how that reviewer feels about the product that he's talking about inside. In this case, it's the iPhone X. So I want to keep on with this example of Apple and ask the question, and put this in your chat, how many Apple boxes are in your closet? Because all of us save Apple boxes. In fact, I know, Jill, you referenced that I post all the time on LinkedIn, and I do. And when I posted 2 days ago that I was doing this talk, someone put in the comments, packaging is so important. I have so many Apple boxes in that I've saved, you know, in my cabinet. So I'll go first. So go ahead and add that to the chat, and I'll go first. I have 21 Apple boxes. So I've been buying Apple products my whole career. So my first computer was a Mac, of course, and I've gotten, you know, the iMacs and the GMacs and those big desktop ones. I've gotten laptops, phones, right? iPhones, there's 4 of us in our family. So there's several, I've got several iPhone boxes, iPads, iPods, Apple Pencils, earpods, just got a new set of earpods because they came free with a laptop I just had to buy for my son for college. So all of us are saving these Apple boxes, and so many Apple boxes are saved. It's really funny because there was a comedian, her name is Nicole Whitaker, and she wrote an article that was in the New Yorker about different hacks that you could do with your Apple box. So it's things like, she puts there things like bake a cake in your apple box. Or it might be use it for shingles on your roof or repair a bridge. It was just really funny. So that brings us really to a larger question, which is, why do we save packaging? And that becomes something really important to think about, because we've already done the research on the product. We've already purchased the product, and yet we're still saving the packaging. And it's not just Apple packaging that we're saving. We're still saving things and saving packaging. Well, to answer that question, we're going to go back in time. And so I know that Jill was talking about all the Sappi materials and all the different publications. And I want to go back, and for any of you that have your Neuroscience of Touch, when at the end of this, later this afternoon, go dig it out of your archives or off of your on, because we're going to talk about some of the research that's in this Neuroscience of Touch. And you can see how much I use this, because you can see it from all the little Post-it notes are in it. So let's go back in time and talk about this. So when we went from crawling on all fours to walking on 2 feet, suddenly it freed up our hands. And so all of these new receptors were created, were adapted, we evolved to have all of these receptors that we could explore the world with our hands. And then as a result, our brain adapted accordingly to accommodate all of that sensory information, all of that raw data that's coming in through our fingertips. Our brain has to interpret it. So our brain evolved accordingly. And so more than half of the brain is devoted to processing sensory experience. And much of that sensory receptivity focuses on touch. So let me show you what I mean by that. So in this diagram, let me see if this pointer will work when I'm on Zoom. Let's see. Yeah, it does. Okay, so in this diagram, you can see that right here, these are 2 parts of the brain that are connected to the sense of smell, and then also the sense of taste. So the olfactory system and the gustatory. And then right here, this is the auditory. And then way over here on the left is the visual cortex. But then right here in the middle, you've got this nice long piece, which is the largest section that's devoted to our senses. That's the reception for our sense of touch. So if 50%, over half of the brain is devoted to our sensory systems, about half of that is devoted to the sense of touch. So you can really see by the way that our brains have developed how important touch is to how we experience the world. So let's come back to the future, back to the present. And now this is in this book, so I'm going to hold up. So this is really in Reach Out and Touch. And there's this great article in Reach Out and Touch called Hello World. And it really gets to the heart of how fundamental and intricate and how important the sense of touch is. So within that article, there's a study that they reference where the sense of touch is the first sense to develop. When they studied it, they studied twins in the womb, and they saw that twins as early as 20 gestational weeks are reaching out to touch each other, to really interact with each other. And so what the article is talking about is how important touch is to our physical development, but also to our emotional development and our social development. So I know that there's a study that talks about when, say when a server delivers a bill or a check at a restaurant, if that person touches, say, the shoulder of the patron who's sitting there, then the tips are higher, okay? But what it's also saying is that it's really important for our social development. So let's put this in the chat. How many of you either got a quarantine puppy or know someone who got a quarantine puppy, right? So here's what happened when we all got sent home for COVID in March, and we weren't going to work anymore, and the kids were home from school and so on, and we were social distancing. We really lost the ability to interact with each other socially, but also to touch each other. And if touch is that important, there's no more handshakes, there's no more hugs. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm a hugger. And so when I see somebody and I can't hug them, it just feels unsatisfying, and it feels like something's missing. So in this, since March, and so in this era of social distancing, pet adoptions are up 70%. So that's how important that touch is to our social and our physical development. I think there's somebody's mic that's open, just so you know, Jill. Okay, so now let's take all of that and let's transfer that to brands, and really, how does that really relate to what it is that we do to, for us as designers, as marketers, as brand owners, wherever we are, you know, in the job that we have and in the work that we're doing, and to transfer that sense of touch. And what does that mean when we're creating customer experiences? And so what's happening is that we as marketers and designers is we're creating content, we're creating experiences for our customers. So then that brings us to another question. And that question is, when we are delivering that content and when we are putting that content up, when we read, is content just content? So that's really asking the question, whatever device we're experiencing it on, is it the same content? Do we experience it the same way? So I want to go back to this Neuroscience of Touch book, okay, and go back and visit one of the researchers that helped write this book for Sappi. And so his name is Dr. Eagleman. And if you're not familiar with him, he has lots of books. His latest book just came out in August, and it's about the neuroplasticity of the brain and how the brain adapts particularly to trauma. So he's got lots of books, and he's studying the brain and perceptions and behavior and things like that. There's a PBS series, there's TED Talks, so there's plenty of information out there if you want to research more. But let's hear what he has to say about what's happening when we're experiencing what we read on various devices.
Since the early 90s, there have been more than 100 published studies on people reading on paper versus on a screen. And it turns out that overall what they show is that people prefer reading on paper. And that's because things are more intuitively navigable and you can make a better mental map of where things are. And it's just cognitively easier on you than reading on a screen. And so people tend to enjoy the experience better and they remember more. A recent study in Norway had high schoolers read texts either on paper or online, and they measured comprehension, and comprehension was much better when you were reading on paper. And similarly, in Sweden, they had a bunch of students read things online. What they found is that their levels of stress were higher, and they were also more tired afterward as compared with when they read on paper. When you consider memory, paper looks even better. And that's because when we read online, we tend to go about it a different way where we're hunting and browsing and scanning for things. But on paper, your attention is directed in a different way. And so we have a longer term memory for what we've read. So while digital devices are great for certain kinds of communication, like sending tweets or getting directions, it turns out that even digital natives have a better experience on paper in terms of comprehending what they're reading and remembering it better.
So if you want to see more of that video or other videos, you can go to Sappi Pops. So I'm sure most of you have been to that before, but you can access most of those videos through sappipops.com. Okay, so let's go talk about a little bit more deeply about one of the studies that he talks about. And so that study is the study by someone in Norway, and that there's an article about that in the book, okay? So there's this researcher out of Norway, her name is Dr. Anne Mangen. And what she did is she got two sets of students and she gave them both the same passage. One set of students read the passage on a digital device and the other set of students read the passage in a book, on ink on paper, okay? So we'll just call that ink on paper. And what she found was that the students who read it in the book, on the ink on paper, they remembered it better. But more than that, they had better comprehension, which means that they were able to interpret the text and the passage better. But then further than that, those students were also better able to put together parts of the plot in a sequence and in chronological order, which then the interpretation of that is that when we're reading on paper, we have a better mental map and we're creating different connections and memories around what it is that we're reading. So it's better mental mapping on that content, which then leads to better comprehension, which then leads to better retention. So let's take that a little further and dig into this notion of bilateral literacy. And so what that's talking about, this was a concept that was developed by another researcher out of Tufts University, and her name is Marianne Wolf. And if you'd like to learn more, she has a great book called Proust and the Squid. And so what she's talking about in this concept is that there's two, let's call them zones or modes. Let's call them modes. Okay, there's two modes when we read. So one of them is for shallow reading, and then there's another mode when we read, and that's for deep reading. So let's take shallow reading first. So shallow reading is when we're reading and we're scanning for information and we're looking for bullet points. So it's the kind of reading that we do, let's say when you first get up and you check your phone and you're looking for headlines, or you're scanning through the headlines and you go to, I don't know if you go to Wall Street Journal or New York Times or wherever it is. When I wake up, I always check this one site called The Skim, which is funny because that's what we're doing, we're skimming. And so it's basically a headline and a quick little brief paragraph about what's happened the day before in the news. So we're really looking for images and we're looking for links, and it's getting the information quickly so that we can get on with our day. So let's put that in that mode, okay? So that would be shallow reading mode. Then we have this deep reading mode where we're really looking at content and we want to learn more about it. And now we're looking at something and we're reading something that's on paper. And so let's think about what happens to our body, right? So if I'm looking at it and I'm scanning it for shallow reading, I can really do that in any environment. I can do that while I'm waiting in line at a checkout. I can do that in the morning. I can do that while I'm making breakfast, whatever. But if I'm actually reading and I want to really think about it and reflect and focus on something, then my heart rate slows down and I get myself ready for that. And if you think about that in terms of the environment, if I know that I'm reading something, say on paper, then the first thing that comes to mind when you start thinking about the environment is lighting. So I actually need light. If I'm reading something on paper, I need light. So how many of you have ever gone to a restaurant and it's a really cool restaurant and it's kind of swanky but it's kind of dark? And so what's the first thing you do when they bring the menu? You actually have to turn your flashlight on so that you can see it, or you kind of go like this because you can't actually see it. So when we get ready to read, our whole physiology and our emotions get us ready for that kind of experience. And so we're more focused and we have better comprehension. So then the question becomes, which do we use for which purpose? So let's bring it back to what we do for work, right? So if we're marketers or if we're designers, which do we use for which purpose? Because we're not saying that these two are mutually exclusive. What we're saying is that each one has its purpose. So let's say you want to get a lot of brand awareness out. And so you're trying to hit your customers with your brand many times throughout a day or throughout a couple of days. So then you might put something on social. You've got various social posts and blog posts and things, e-blasts that are coming in. But let's say you're within the buying process, and let's go back to this whole idea of when we got, the Apple phone, right? So we'll go back to that very beginning, or another electronic, and you're researching all these different touch points, and at some point there becomes a point in that research process where you really want to reflect, and maybe you want to look at a chart, or you want to look at maybe some of the competitors, and you really want to sit down and think about it. You may print something out, or there might be a spec sheet, or sometimes if I go to the mailbox and I get a catalog and it's a nice day out, I may sit out on my front step and flip through that catalog, which could be a couple of minutes. Now, if you think about that as you compare those, for me to sit and flip through a catalog for 2 minutes is so very different than for me to flip through an email account that I have where I'm looking at various e-blasts, because I can get through 50 of those in 2 minutes, or even 100, right, if I'm just scanning through them. Whereas if I sit with that catalog for 2 minutes, which doesn't sound very long, but it is when you're talking about brand recognition. So from all that research, people understand and remember what they read on paper better than what they read on a screen, which is what we've just talked about. And when they learned that, researchers had this theory, and they thought that the physicality of the paper explains this discrepancy. And it turns out that they're correct. So again, I'm going to ask you to go back to your archives, to your Sappi archives, and dig out this print and book. Okay, so within the print and, which by the way is about 10 years old. So and you can see my post-it note on this. So within the print and book, there's a study by Millward Brown where they studied people and they studied the brain, and this is through fMRI scans, and they studied people reading something, a passage on paper, and then also reading it on a digital device. And what they found is they looked at what was happening in the brain. They found that the brain reacts differently whether they're reading it on a device versus whether they're reading it on paper. And in this case, size does matter, which is really funny. So if you look at the section in blue, hold on, let me see if this pointer will work again. Let's see. Okay, so this section here in blue is what gets activated if you're reading on a digital device, which is, you know, this size, right? So if you're reading it on ink on paper, then it's this section here that's in red. Okay, so that's a larger part of the brain. And so what's happening is because there's more of the brain being used, because there's other parts in addition to the visual, right? Because we're seeing it, but we're also touching it and feeling it. There's more memories that are created. And then we have a stronger emotional connection to that physical piece. Okay, so now let's bring that back to the book that we're talking about, this Reach Out and Touch, right? So we're going to bring it back to that book. And within that book, there's an article by a man named David Sachs. And he wrote a book called Revenge of Analog. And within that, and within this article, what it's talking about is that there's two reasons why people are gravitating towards physical objects and having that physical experience. The first reason is for functional reasons, functional purposes. And the second reason is for emotional purposes. So let's talk about those functional purposes. Okay, so functional might be, let's say you're in a meeting and you're taking notes. Okay, and you're sitting around the table and there's a few of you and you're sitting around the table and you're talking about different things. And you'll notice when you've been in meetings, there are some people that sit at the computer and they're typing because they're typing in Word or whatever program they're using to take notes. But then there's other people that are handwriting their notes. And so for the people that are handwriting their notes, there's something, and I know that's true for me because I handwrite notes, there's something in the process, the kinesthetic learning of writing those notes that is helpful in remembering the content of what you're listening to. So for me, I know if I'm handwriting notes, it's the act of handwriting, the kinesthetic learning is what helps me remember that material. But then also, how many times have you taken notes or read a passage in something and you can't remember where it is, except you know that it was in a book and you know that it's in the upper right-hand corner? That's this whole idea of mental mapping. So that's the functional reason behind this. Okay, the second reason that he talks about is for emotional reasons. And that's this idea that we have these objects because they make us happy. We trust them, we feel good about them because we have them, okay? So we're gravitating towards that physical experience because it makes us happy and it gives us something tangible, something that we can hold. So now let's think about that in terms of brands, right? So let's bring this back to what we do, right? So we're gonna bring it back to marketing and designing and so on. When you're talking about having something that you can hold, and that is directly connected to trust, now let's talk about trust in a brand, right? Which then, of course, leads to brand loyalty. And that's how that starts to relate to packaging and to all of the things that we do. So the things that we touch, they mean more to us, which then brings us to the next question, which is why? Well, it turns out that there's a researcher, and her name is Joanne Peck, and she's out of University of Wisconsin. And she is the preeminent researcher on haptics and why we touch and the things that we touch. And within the article that's in this book, and by the way, let me point out, because we're talking about touch so much and her article, and on the page that's her article, that one that I just showed you in the previous slide where the person's reaching out to touch that wall, you can feel there's a gritty texture on it. And so throughout this, I think Jeff Hernandez and Classic printed this, and I think he's on, so we might be able to ask him a question at the end if we have time. Anyways, throughout, there's all different types of haptic finishes that we've done throughout, and I know that that was one of them. If you've already gotten your book, you'll feel that it's got a soft touch and it's got this embossing and things like that. So I don't want to get off track, but I do want you to notice that, you know, as we're talking about it and as you're flipping through the book. But okay, so So Dr. Peck, she's out of Wisconsin, and she's this researcher, and she's talked all about, she's done all this research on haptics and why we touch. And so here's what she's saying. Simply touching a product increases our feeling of ownership, which increases the value of the product. So let's unpack that. Okay, there's two things that are happening. Simply touching the product increases our feeling of ownership. So what happens is, let's say you're in the store, or you're shopping, you're in the mall, you walk into a boutique and you pick something up. And just by putting it in your hand, your brain starts to think that you own it. And that's called psychological ownership. And it's very powerful. In fact, it's so powerful. It's actually, it's primitive as well. So, okay, let's add this to the chat. Okay, how many of you have gone to a store, could be a toy store, Target, any place, with a child where they pick something up and then they say mine, and now you have to negotiate with them to get it back onto the shelf. So what's happening, so when I say it's a very fundamental emotion that we have, it's so fundamental, it's happening, it's the hardest with toddlers. So when my kids were toddlers, it's the hardest, because I know if I was running errands with them and we were doing things and they picked it up, I either didn't want them to touch because I didn't want them to break something, or I knew, God, once they touch it, now I've got to get it back on the shelf unless it's coming home with me, because at some point, sometimes I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to have time for the negotiation, and it's coming home with me. And other times, I've got to get it back onto the shelf. But when they say it's mine, that's psychological ownership. So you can think about the implications of that with packaging. So that's part one of what she's saying, but here's part two of what she's saying. Once we have that psychological ownership, and once we're holding that in our hand, there's another phenomenon that gets triggered in our brains, and that's called the endowment effect. And what's happening in the endowment effect is, just because we feel like we own it, even though, think about it, we're in the store. I haven't even put it in the basket. I haven't even paid for it yet. And yet my brain is thinking that I own it. And now, because it is thinking that, the endowment effects kicks in, and I'm willing to pay for it, and I'm willing to pay more for it, which is what's really amazing. So let's go back to Dr. Eagleman and hear what he has to say about the endowment effect.
In 2003, the Attorney General's office in Illinois put out a warning to holiday shoppers. They said, don't let companies put something in your hand while you're shopping around, because this might lead to unwanted purchases. So what was that about, and why did the Attorney General's office get involved? Well, let's start at the beginning. There's a psychological phenomenon known as the endowment effect. And it means that if I own something, I think it's more valuable than if you own it. So let's say I were to win this coffee mug in a raffle. So I might sell it to you for, let's say, $10, because that's what I really think it's worth. But if you own it, I'm not going to pay more than $6 for it, because it's just a coffee mug. So the idea is that things are more valuable if they already belong to us. And this happens to be true across cultures, and even across animal species. Even monkeys behave this way.
So again, if you want to learn more and see more of those videos, you can really see them on sappypops.com. Okay, so let's take this back into packaging. So you see something on the shelf, and there's all these sensory stimuli that are coming at you. So there's all the visual stimuli that's coming. So it's the colors, and it's the imagery, it's the typefaces, so all the things that we do, right, as designers. So there's all that. But then there's also haptics, touch things. So it could be the finishes, it's some embellishments, it's some special effects, all of those things that we're seeing. And then there's also other kinds of sensory marketing. There's the sense of smell, so there's scented inks, and then of course there's an auditory stimuli. So here's what's happening when you're in the store. First you notice it, and then you pick it up, and then when you put that into the context of what we've talked about in terms of trust and in terms of emotional connections and what's happening and the things that are firing off in our brains, so we notice it, we understand it, and now we also remember it better. And so there's more engagement and there's really better brand recall when more senses are involved. There's another author, and he's a marketer, his name's Martin Lindstrom, and he wrote a book called Brand Sense. And I'm gonna read this to you because this is out of his book. And this is what's so powerful, and this is what makes this research so important to us as marketers and designers, and you can see what the implications are for brands. So let me read this quote to you. The more sensory touch points consumers can access when they're thinking about buying a brand, so the more sensory touch points, right, the higher the number of sensory memories that are activated, which is kind of what we saw in that diagram I showed you with the blue and the red, because there's more memories that are activated. Okay, let me go back to the quote. And the higher the number of sensory memories that are activated, the stronger the bond between the brand and the consumer. And that's what makes this so powerful, because as brands, as designers, as ambassadors for these brands, as we're creating these materials, what we're trying to do is create stronger bonds and really build that loyalty and really engage those consumers. So when you think about it, you're a customer in a store and you reach out and you touch something, or you see the product and you reach out and you touch it, and then there's more memories that are created. So then you have a stronger emotional connection. Then I'm putting this all together. Then you get psychological ownership, right? You also have stronger trust because you're actually touching it. It's something tangible and physical. And now the endowment effect kicks in, so you'll pay more for it. And when we're talking about packaging, all of that is leading to sales and conversion, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about packaging. We're really talking about increased sales and conversion. So next, what I want to do is show you some of the applications and some of the examples and really case studies that are, and talk about some of the other articles that are within this book. And the first one that I want to talk about is this one for Camry. And what this is, and there's this article is in the book, and so it shows it, and it'll show the statistics too. And what the article is talking about is that there was a campaign for Camry where they did a magazine insert in InStyle. And I'm going to show it to you, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. Okay, so now let's look at what's happening. So Camry did this campaign, and what they did is they worked with InStyle magazine to identify 50,000 subscribers who were prospective Camry buyers, who were prospective buyers for Camry. Okay, so now let's think about it. You get your InStyle magazine in the mail, and just because it's an insert, it already feels different. So, when you have an insert, it's similar to those fragrance ads or a blow-in that happens in the ad. So this is an insert, so you're automatically going to flip to it. And then this particular insert also feels different than the typical page, than the typical ad or article that's in InStyle magazine. So you already have that material and haptic part of the experience, okay? Excuse me, then you go and you go to open it. So what do? You put your hands on those handles, and they're all sculpted so they fit right into your hands. So you've got that. Then you've got this whole 3D thing happening, which if you have questions, I know Trish is on the line, so she can probably answer that, although she may have one of her episodes might be on it. Anyhow, so you've got this whole 3D thing happening, with the pop-ups and everything that's happening structurally with this piece. So that's the haptics part and the visual part. But now they've added in another sense. So when you put your thumbs down on those little metallic circles that are on there, there's some electroconductive ink. So you put your thumbs on those, and now that starts to activate the heart rate monitor. So now it's monitoring my heart rate, and now there's some auditory stimuli as well. well. Now, we can't even tell it from this video, but in addition, they've added a fourth sense because they used scented inks. So the whole piece smells like leather because they've used scented inks where the leather is on it. So you're talking about when in sort of the relativity of that quote that I just read to you about the senses and how you're activating more memories and so on. Think about how the memories and the impact that this kind of piece would have on someone. So let's take a look at these analytics. So I said 50,000 subscribers received it. Within the first 2 months, there were 108 million PR related impressions. And then 50% of consumers spent an average of 3 minutes with the ad. 3 minutes. That's really the important part of this. It's those 3 minutes, because when we go back and think about that in terms of what I described to you and explained to you on bilateral literacy, you're talking about shallow reading, remember, and deep reading. That's a really in-depth experience if you're spending 3 minutes with the ad, which makes it much more memorable. Let's move on to another example. This is an example of a direct mail campaign that BMW did. And what they were trying to do was really get to the heart of the sensuality of experiencing that, that M-Class BMW. And again, I can give a shout out to Jeff because I think Jeff Hernandez of Classic is on the line, and he actually printed this campaign and facilitated this for them. Well, didn't print it because it's an M print, but take a look at this video so you can see what I mean, and then we'll talk about it again afterwards.
I've driven with Secret Service. I've done some movies. I've never driven across paper while spraying ink onto my tires, so this will be a first.
So a couple things to notice. I don't know if you noticed when the pressman was holding up that card, right? It had already been cut. The pressman was holding up that card. So there were two things to notice. One was, did you notice what the headline was? The headline was, "Can you smell the rubber?" So they're really activating that sense of smell when you're looking at that direct mail piece. And then the other thing to notice was the material of it was important, and the print of it, because it was really an M print, because it was made with the tires and the ink on the paper. But then if you notice, you could even see the dimples of the pavement, which is really also part of the haptic experience of that direct mail. Now, when you think about that in terms of psychological ownership and the endowment effect, it's, and you think about that in terms of a $60,000 vehicle, that if you can start to activate some of those emotions just through a direct mail campaign, just by connecting to all of those senses, you can see how powerful that is to brands. Let's move on. There's a couple of articles in the book that are devoted to magazines. And what they're talking about are a few different points. One of the points that they're talking about is that, and I'll read this to you, when a new issue is out, the old one isn't recycled but filed on a bookshelf. And what that's talking about is that now magazines and the content that is in magazines has much more staying power than it used to have. So it's really flipped. It used to be that people thought of things that were in print as becoming obsolete very quickly. And they thought that because you could change the copy and you could change the imagery and you could change the content of what you were doing online so easily. It's rather liquid, it's fluid, right? And print is different, so it has a more staying power, right? So they called that obsolete. Now, because there's so much content, digital content out there that we can, online content out there that we can access, and those things are changing so quickly, it's that has become ephemeral. It's that digital content that has become ephemeral, not the print content. So what they're finding is that the content that's in magazines has staying power because the articles are much more in depth. The magazines are in fact focused on much more niche audiences. Okay, so that's why that has more staying power. But there's a few other points in these articles that are about catalogs and magazines. There's a few other points that they're making. One of them is that print is tangible. And this goes back to the same thing that we were talking about with that article by David Sachs, who wrote Revenge Analog. So it's a similar concept of that. It's that print is tangible. It's something that I can hold and that I have an emotional connection to. So think about it in terms of this. And they talk about this case study in the article. If you're an online only and you're a digital first, an online only platform, and the example that we're going to use is Airbnb. So if they're an online platform, and let's put this in the chat too. How many of you have, let's see, how many times have you rented from Airbnb? So we're going to be talking about Airbnb. So put in the chat, how many times have you rented from Airbnb? I've done it probably, I don't know, maybe 10 times, from Airbnb. And so here's what's happening. It's Airbnb, total online experience, right? So I'm looking for, first I know where I'm going, then I start to explore where I'm going to stay, and I look at all the different places, and I look at where they are in the map, and I look at the photos and all that kind of stuff. At some point, I reach out and have a communication with some of the renters. And then at another point, I actually choose the one that I'm going to rent, and then we have that exchange. And then when I go and I arrive at the place, I've arranged to get the key, or they've given me a code on how to get in. And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes there's something there. They've either left maybe a bottle of wine, they gave me once, another time it was like a basket of snacks. I've gotten, maps or brochures of things to do that are in the area. But there's nowhere in that experience that has anything to do with Airbnb. It's all of the physical experience that I'm having has everything to do with the place that I've rented and with the person that rented me the place, but nothing with Airbnb. So what Airbnb did is they created a magazine, and they sent it to all of their renters to put in their properties that they were renting on Airbnb. And they did that with intention that those people would then let me, say I'm the renter, right, the rentee, have that piece so that I have a better connection to Airbnb. Okay, so that's one way, was tangibility. The other is, it's ephemeral. There's another part of those articles that's talking about the credibility of print and the credibility of magazines. And the case that they talk about is a magazine. It's actually a design magazine. So it was an AIGA journal called Eye on Design. And people were not taking it very seriously when it was digital only content. But as soon as they switched and turned it into a printed magazine, it became credible journalistic source. So people then took it much more credibly, and they took it much more seriously. What's really good about magazines is, and you can use this statistic if you're introducing this into some of your marketing strategy, 81% of people have purchased something or traveled somewhere after reading about it in a magazine. Now, there's one other thing that's talked about in that article, and then it goes more deeply into it in this other article that's actually also in the book. And what I love about this spread is that texture, that sort of marbly texture that you're seeing on the screen, that's kind of the lavender that's underneath the A. That's done and looks like into some kind of a gradated metallic ink or something like that. It's really quite beautiful. What's happening with print and connecting to our online worlds is it can really go in two directions. So the online world can become more haptic, so that when we're searching online, there's a lot of research being done now on how to make us actually feel what it is that we're experiencing. So that's happening through vibrations and different things that they're doing. The corollary to that is that paper can become more technological. And that's what's happening in this next example that I'm going to show you, where they've used some electroconductive inks to make the paper more technological, so that the printed piece becomes a portal back to our online world.
Think about the accomplishments. I can see you watching me. Approach everyone positive, but if you can't forgive him, you're not the man.
Creating music can really trigger creativity in young people. That's why McDonald's in the Netherlands introduced McTracks, a paper placemat turned into a full music production station. By the use of conductive ink on a piece of paper, we connected our placemat to your smartphone. Every touch point triggered a full sound bank to kickstart your creativity.
Let's go, let's go.
Just select the beat and you're good to go. Create your own sounds and melodies. Then you can tweak your track with any kind of effects. You can even record your own vocals.
To the menu, I can get you something too. Ain't no hidden beats play, what you say?
That's how you play the placemat.
Let's go through this.
And this is how we challenge your talent by showing your music skills at McDonald's.
So that was a campaign that was done in Amsterdam, and the research was for that was done by some researchers in the Netherlands. But you can just see and imagine the implications of that kind of using print as that kind of portal, and what the amount of time that people are spending with their printed materials if you do something like that. It just has huge implications. I know that I've talked a lot about packaging, so now I want to show a couple of examples of packaging. And then I also want to talk about, there's an article in there by a researcher named Dr. Charles Spence. He's out of Oxford University. And in this article, he's talking about three things. One of them is that touch is very instrumental in our impulse purchases, which we've talked a lot about. So that really relates to psychological ownership and endowment effect. So I don't want to go into that again. The second thing that he's talking about is that packaging influences our perception of the product that's inside the container. So there was a study done on wine where people were given a glass of wine. One was in a glass and one was in a paper cup. It happened to be the same wine, but people preferred and thought that the wine that was in the glass tasted better than the wine that was in the paper cup. So you can think about it in terms of, let's say you're gonna you're celebrating and you're gonna open up some champagne or something, you know, sparkling wine or whatever, and you unscrew it or you pop the top. It's just a completely different experience. I know that when I was in Florida in August with my kids, my daughter really likes ice cream. So we walked to this ice cream store that was a few blocks from the beach, and so we would go in the middle of the afternoon. And so the first time we went, I noticed that they were very environmentally conscious. So their spoons weren't plastic; they had wooden spoons, and which is great because they're trying to help the environment, and wood is a renewable resource, so it makes perfect sense. Except that both my daughter and I noticed that the ice cream tasted a little different because the gustatory sense, the sense of taste, is linked so strongly to the way it feels, to textures in our mouth, and it's linked so strongly to the way it smells. And in this case, it was linked to the texture of that wooden spoon. So now let's bring that to packaging. Think about it this way. You've researched a product and you've purchased it and you feel really good about your purchase, and you went through all of the research and you did everything that typically happens when you research a product. And let's say you paid, I don't know, $80 for it, and it comes and now it's in a really flimsy carton. And so it just starts to deflate your excitement that you had about that product, right? Because you felt really good about it, but now it's in something kind of flimsy, so you don't feel nearly as confident about it. So all of these concepts are talked about, Dr. Spence talks about in this article. The third concept he is talking about in this article is this idea of signature elements. And he shows it, and we show it in the book. It's shown with some iconic brands. And what a signature element is when you can take, it's a part of the package where you can take away the logo and you still recognize it as that brand. Okay, so for instance, in this example, if we took off the Chanel No. 5 label, we would still know that this is Chanel perfume. And what this package also has is it has even more sensory marketing to it. So even to open up the top, you have to peel off the wax seal and take away the string. In this example, this is for Jif lemon juice, and instead of putting the lemon juice in a typical bottle, what they've done, and this is classic, this has been around for decades. Oh, and I love this spread, by the way, because they actually make the feel of the lemon. So what's happening here is instead of putting it in a typical lemon juice jar, they've put it in a container that's the shape of a lemon. And it's not just the shape of a lemon, then it actually feels like a lemon in your hand because they've added the dimples. And then in the book, it's actually sculpturally embossed, so you can feel it. And then also in the book, what it has is some scented inks, and they're not even scratch and sniff. You just have to touch them and it releases those scent capsules. So just taking off even the logo Jif, people that are familiar with this would certainly know that this is Jif lemon juice. Toblerone is another example. So the triangles are really inspired by the mountains of Switzerland. So you take off the name Toblerone and you know that it's still Toblerone. And we certainly cannot talk about signature elements without talking about Coke, because the Coke bottle is the most recognizable iconic shape in the world. So take off the logo, we know it's a Coke bottle. Take off the cap, we know it's a Coke bottle. Smash the glass and you get one little piece that's curved that also has that green hue. Guess what? We know it's a Coke bottle. So when he's talking about signature elements, and when we're talking about that in terms of different things that we can do for design and for the companies that we work for, the companies, you know, that are our clients, and those signature elements can be a material. So it can be the type of material, whether it's a sturdy substrate or a thinner substrate, depending on what it is. It can be a shape. It can be the different haptic elements of touch. So it can be a soft touch, it can be a gritty touch, it can be a variety of things. It can be, all of those things are signature elements that then that brand can own differently than, say, what their competitors have. So I'll show you a couple of examples. So American Express, for years, when they had their direct mail campaigns, they were always in soft touch. Wired Magazine, for several years, had a gritty texture. A couple of other examples. If I go to the mailbox and I see something really thick, I would call this a signature element. I see something really thick. It's either a Uline catalog or it's a Restoration Hardware catalog. So that, again, would be a signature element. Within the book also, there's this great spread that has lots of statistics. And sometimes when we're designing these things, we need some justification behind what it is that we're doing when we add these to our marketing strategies. And so these kinds of statistics are very valuable when you are trying to persuade your client to do these things, or you're trying to persuade either upstream or downstream within your organization. So this is a pretty powerful statistic if you're talking about introducing a magazine into your marketing strategy. The average reader spends 40 minutes reading a magazine. I know the first time I read Reach Out and Touch, I was actually on the runway, and I spent 2 hours reading it cover to cover. And I certainly don't expect any of you to sit and read it cover to cover for 2 hours, but to market, and cumulatively, if you spent 2 hours, or if it's another magazine and you spend 40 minutes, that's a long time with a piece, particularly when we compare it to the things that we're doing on our phones. This one statistic has to do with ads. So 18% of ads are noticed if they're digital versus 73% if they're print ads. This next one has to do with retention. So 36% of people had better retention if it was a print ad than if it was a digital ad, and that retention was only 16%. And then finally, 1 in 2 people share advertisements that they've seen in a magazine with friends or family. So let's bring this back to my original question, which is, why do we save packaging? So we know clearly that Apple really values its packaging, which is stated here by The Guardian, right? Apple pays as much attention to its packaging as it does to its products. Getting it just right is an obsession, okay? So let's bring this back to, why do we save packaging? And it really comes back to all of the things that we've talked about. We save packaging because we create stronger memories with it. There's iconic shapes and different things like that. There's different haptics and things, and so we have a stronger emotional connection. We save packaging because it's real and it's something that we can touch and it's something that we experience, and we really do experience the world through our senses. And then when we pick it up, we save the packaging because we feel we own it. In fact, in this case, we do own it, but we also, because of the endowment effect, we attribute more value to it. So all of these connections to packaging and to the things we touch, it really does engage us, and it engages our customers. If we're the brand, right? It engages our customers. It really does drive people to sales. So it really does drive purchase intent, and it does build brand loyalty. And really, the most successful brands appeal to our haptic brains. And they do this with clarity, with authenticity, and with relevance. And the way that they're doing that is through sensory marketing. They're doing it with stunning visuals. They're doing it with tactile and special effects. They're doing it with shapes, with sense, with sounds, with interactivity, really all of the things that we've just talked about. So now that we've answered that question, let's flip it. And now let's ask a different question. What's the value of a saved package? And that's really a broader question, and really the most important question when we're talking about creating these things. So if we flip the question, what's the value of a saved package? And to ask that, it's really, what value do you or your clients or your organization or your brand attach to a really surefire way to connect to more parts of the brain, to trigger more memories, to trigger more emotional connections, to build trust, to trigger that psychological ownership, which then triggers the endowment effect, right? That's what the packaging is doing. And all of that is with the sole purpose to engage your customers, to persuade them to buy, and really to build up brand loyalty. That's really our bigger question for today. I want to go back and revisit that unboxing video that I showed you at the beginning. And from the research that was done early on, as unboxing videos were becoming its own genre of video, there was some research that was done by Google. And you can see from this chart that there's a general upward trajectory of people watching videos, and it never really comes down, and it never has come down, right? So you can see that there's spikes in different times of the year, different seasons that are buying seasons, but it never really comes down. There's two things that are important to talk about with unboxing videos that I want to point out. The first is that when people are watching unboxing videos, there's another phenomenon that's happening in the brain, and it's activating something that are called mirror neurons. And this is a phenomenon that was discovered in the 1990s by some Italian researchers at a university in Italy. And what's happening is that as we're watching someone else do something, our brains respond and react as if we also are doing that something. So if you think about that in the context of psychological ownership, if you're watching that video, but you're not actually opening that box, but your brain is firing off as if you are opening that box, that's pretty powerful. Now, here's what makes it even more powerful. This is the second point that I want to make. 62% of people watching unboxing videos are watching as part of their research because they have an intent to purchase that item. So think about that in terms of statistics. You created a package, and in the case of that Apple box, that one had 15 million views. But 9 million people watching that video, so that's the 60% roughly, I'm estimating, 9 million people watching that video had intent to purchase, and they've got things firing off in their brain as if they're starting to own it because of the mirror neurons, because that's the psychological ownership. So that's how we start to answer that question. And then what I also want to talk about is really when we start talking about value is, when are we as brands valuable to our customers, and when are our customers valuable to us? So we are valuable to our customers when we can attract them with visually stunning packaging and campaigns that really engage them with emotional connections and delight them with a valuable sensory experience. So all of the things that we're talking about is very valuable to people because they start to trust brands and they're really connecting to us. But they are valuable to us when they purchase more of our products, when they evangelize for us on social media, so things like the unboxing videos and Instagram and so on, when they collaborate with us, when they try our new products, they introduce us to their friends, and they share our data with us. And so often when companies and finance departments are making decisions about packaging or other marketing and communication materials and producing this package, what they're thinking about in terms of adding these special effects or the materials or the embellishments, they're really thinking about them as a cost, as a unit cost. And which is a very myopic, very tunnel vision view of what's happening, because really the value of a saved package is really an investment in a customer purchasing a product. It's an investment in existing customers becoming more loyal and customer development. And it's an investment in a customer sharing that package on social media. So the value of a package isn't just the cost of what it is to produce that. The value of the package is really an investment in the brand equity of that brand. It's really in customer value. It's an investment in customer value and really in customer equity. And I'll end, I know we're almost to our 1 hour limit, Jill. I'm gonna end with 2 quotes. And one of them is, print is trust, quality, and value come to life in 3 dimensions. And finally, seeing is believing, but feeling is the truth. Now, I know that I've used up all of our time really, so I'm happy to stay on for a couple minutes to do Q&A if you want to, but let me check back in with you, Jill. So I've just stopped sharing, so hopefully we can see you. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, I think that would be great if you can hang on for a little bit. I know the comments in the chat, oh my goodness.
Oh, good.
So many of us definitely hang on to our Apple packaging. Oh my goodness, 5, 7 or 8, 6, 9, too many. I mean, there's a ton in here, right? 20, oh my God. Okay, that's
I have 21, so I'm sure there's someone with more than 21.
I love that somebody does what I do. You make them dividers in your desk drawer.
Yeah, that's great.
That is very good. I think
organized chaos.
Yeah,
for sure. Okay, I'm scrolling back up here trying to get.
Hey, Jill.
Yes.
I wanted to say that I know some people said they haven't gotten their books yet. So they were shipping, they started shipping Monday afternoon and Tuesday. So they were a 2-day destination point from where we ship. So hopefully you'll be getting them soon. And I don't know if you noticed, but I loved Vicki's thousands of Post-it notes that she has on her books. And I so appreciate how she's taken all of, a lot of our pieces that we've done over the years and weaved it all together to help create this story. Because I know that I feel this digital fatigue, and I might be biased because I work in the paper industry, but I really do believe in it, and I really do pay attention to great things I get in the mail, and I do save my beautiful boxes. I've told Vicki many stories, and I show her some of the boxes that I get and how I feel about that brand. So Vicki, I just want to thank you for bringing it all together, and I love seeing some of my old pieces that you weaved in there. They were little surprises. So,
well, to me, that's the powerful stuff, right? Like Vicki, you're referring to. I love that print and piece, and literally it's in my keeper file. And I made a comment like, I think really great print doesn't have an expiration date. Like so maybe there's an actual physical date on it, and okay, it's from 10 years ago. Like literally, I made a comment. I still saved all my Martha Stewart magazines because I love the comment. And every season I'll pull them out, like oh wait, what's especially the holiday ones. There is something that I'm definitely a sensory learner, right? Like I need to touch and feel And I didn't realize, now it makes sense that you slow down when you read that much. Because I definitely, like, I don't know, maybe I'm burned out with this, but my retention digitally is just not there. So I think that's pretty cool. But those pieces, they're just super good. They're always informative. Okay, the questions are coming in here. Vicki, can you speak on what the approximate rate of adaptation is for brands utilizing or being aware of sensory effects on their packaging portfolio?
So that's a good question. I mean, I guess I'm wondering if the question is the rate of adoption. Is that what you said? The rate of adoption?
Yeah, I think so. It was a typo, but yes, I believe the rate of adoption.
So I don't think that there's a long rate of adoption. I mean, I think particularly now you're seeing a lot of interplay between the gloss and the matte varnishes that are happening. I think you're seeing a lot of things with metallics. I think the important thing that we're talking about when we're talking about those embellishments is really to make it congruent with the product that you have. So you don't want to just like throw everything at it. It really does have a purpose. It's not random and it's not arbitrary, but we're all designers, so we know that anyhow. It's the same thing with color. You don't just choose green because you like it. You choose green because maybe there's a little button on the package that has something to do with recyclability or the environment. It's not going to be pink, it's going to be green. So that's the same thing with, I think, the sensory marketing or the special effects and the embellishments that you're doing.
And just one thing to add, oh, sorry, I was just going to say that Vicki and I are working on developing and looking at a lot of research about sensory marketing. So we've been in contact with a lot of the schools out there, and Cal Poly has done a lot of really interesting work on the effects of decision making using soft touch coatings. And there's schools that Clemson is doing really interesting work, and so we've been having these conversations. That'll be one of the next things that we come back and share with you, but just really trying to see the effects of some of these special effects and coatings and how they help drive purchases or don't, which ones work. So
that's super exciting to me is the presentation was going on, I'm making notes, because I think one of the great things about our industry is we have amazing materials and the papers are unbelievable. And the technology on the print side has caught up where we've been able to do beautiful things with offset, but now we've got digital embellishments that regardless of the run size, we can achieve some of those same things. So when we're talking about maybe startup culture or brands that are small, but they know the importance of connecting with their audience. Maybe their budget hasn't caught up yet, but the ability is there. So I go to do we have any data? Maybe our printers can weigh in this a little bit more, like what's the ROI of a blind emboss versus maybe raised UV or foil stamp versus a metallic. I think it could be really interesting if there's, I don't know if there's any measurements on those things, but I know from the marketing side of things, we know the difference may not always be that great, but sometimes trying to sell it upstream. I know that was a comment like, where are those stats? I need those stats.
They're in the book because we do need those, but they're in the book.
For sure.
Yeah.
Everybody loved the presentation. There's really some great positive comments in here. And I get any message. Okay.
Well, I know we're at 2:08, so I know I really like to be respectful of people's time. So I know I finished the presentation right at 2, and so I mean, I can stick around for another couple minutes if that's what we want, but I also don't want people to feel like they're going to miss something because they've got to get back to work. It is 2:09.
Yes. So I think if you guys, I mean, I'll throw out this last question, but if you guys have more questions, you want to type them in. I mean, I'll have Vicki answer them, but I want to make sure you guys all know if you don't. SappiPops.com, an amazing resource. So when we talk about all of these statistics and kind of like the business case for the why, go there. It is crazy the amount of information you will find in order to convince a client or possibly a boss on the why behind it, but really just great information, kind of connecting the dots. You will get your piece, as Patty said, and it's awesome. You're gonna want to sit down and read it cover to cover. And I would just say, make sure to follow Vicki. I mean,
yeah,
she's
so
amazing.
let me just add one more thing. If you want to follow me and you want to learn more, so there's 2 ways you can reach me. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I do post every day. So if you just look me, I'm the only Vicki Strull, so it's VICKI STRULL. So do that search, and Jill, if you want to type that into the chat. And the second is you can also reach out to me if you want to email me. You can either just go to my website, which also is vickistroll.com, or you can reach out to me, Vicki@vickistroll.com. So pretty easy if you've got other questions, or put them in the chat, and then Patty and I and Jill can respond to them.
So there's something glitchy going on where I see a couple that have gone in privately. So I'm going to just read them.
Oh, thanks, Isabel, for putting that in.
How do we get the marketing professionals in their how do we get the marketing professionals in their departments get it so they buy in? I'm not sure if you're talking about the piece, the presentation, if that's what you're referring to. So
I think it's I get that question a lot. I think that's actually it's a big question, because what's happening is if we're designers and we're trying to get the marketing departments to buy in, what we really need to get at is have a business conversation, which is a lot of what we're talking about at the end of that presentation when I was talking about the value of a saved package, not why do we save a package. And it's having that kind of conversation with the finance departments or the marketing departments to really pull it from their budget, so they're recognizing it not just as a simple cost of an embellishment on a package, but really a broader value to what it is that they're bringing to their customer base.
Sometimes I refer to, instead of just return on investment, I think about return on impact as well.
Great one. Yeah, I love that.
And it's not easy to share, but you can capture experiences, and you know, there are ways, there are great case studies out there. But I know what it's like dealing with procurement, and so we all have our jobs cut out for us, for sure. But I do think that print really does do something that, you know, that slide that says it gets noticed, you know, it's great for comprehension and for memory. And those three things together in a world that we're getting, you know, Trish did a webinar for us a few weeks back, and she used a statistic where on average right now, we're getting 2 pieces of mail in our mailbox, although I've noticed a pickup. But in contrast, we're getting 157 emails a day. And so what are you going to pay attention to? And as long as the mail is well designed, which I think we could do, we could get better designed mail, right?
For sure.
Opportunity.
Yes, for sure. That was a great webinar, by the way. I thoroughly enjoyed that, because I do think now is such a great time for, as marketers and brands, not everybody's back at work, but we are really engaged with our mail. I mean, and I'm not getting as much really thoughtful direct mail, even the catalogs. Like I got the Serena and Lily catalog, which I'm not gonna lie, I would love everything in it. There's no way, but like it just can't. But my husband's like, okay, I'm going to pitch this. I'm like, oh, no, you're not. Like, that's my bedtime reading, right? Like the good stuff we do hang on to. But I'd like to, I'm kind of surprised that I haven't seen more of it. And I think this holiday season will be very interesting to see what brands are doing and how they use mail. Okay. I think that probably wraps it up. Really, I'm going to share the comments with you afterwards, but for everybody on, know that we will share the recording. I'm going to stop recording now.